Here's what's happening. Elvis Presley, whose country rock guitar and gyrating hips launched a new era in popular music, died this afternoon at Baptist Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee at the age of 42. Presley had been taken to the emergency room suffering from what was described as respiratory distress.
One morning, the most famous man alive, Elvis Presley, simply did not wake up. No warning, no goodbye, just silence behind a closed bathroom door. The world was told one story, but the truth was something far darker. What did the people closest to him actually know? And why did nobody stop it? Join us as we reveal the shocking truth behind Elvis Presley's final hours. The day the world lost the king. It was a Tuesday morning in August 1977. A call went out from a white mansion in Memphis, Tennessee, and the world stopped breathing for a moment. Elvis Presley, the man who changed music forever, the boy from Tupelo who became a king, was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor of his home at Graceland. He was only 42 years old. Emergency workers arrived quickly. There was nothing they could do. By the time the news spread beyond those walls, beyond that house, beyond that city, it had already become something impossible to believe. Elvis was gone. Within hours, radio stations fell silent mid-broadcast. Fans gathered in the streets, some crying, some holding each other, some simply standing still and staring at nothing. Telephone lines across America were jammed with people calling loved ones, just to say the words out loud. Saying it out loud was the only way to make it feel real. He had sold over 1 billion records. He had starred in 33 films. He had performed for millions of people across decades, and every single one of those people felt like they had lost someone they personally knew. The official cause was listed as a heart attack, a sad ending, or so it seemed. The truth about what really happened inside Graceland on that final day was far more complicated than any headline could capture. The Elvis who died that morning was not the same man the world thought they knew. The story of how he got there, the years of silence, the people around him, and the secrets that followed him into that bathroom, that story was only just beginning. The man no one saw, the Elvis the world knew, was electric. He moved across the stage like lightning, his voice filling every corner of every room he ever walked into. He was confidence and fire, and something almost impossible to look away from. The Elvis of 1977 was something very different. By the final years of his life, the man behind the gates of Graceland had become almost unrecognizable. His body had swollen from years of poor eating, little movement, and a schedule that made normal life impossible. His speech had slowed. His energy had faded. The spark that once lit up arenas across the country had grown dim in a way that frightened the people closest to him. He rarely left Graceland. The outside world, the one that still worshipped him, the one that still played his records and screamed his name, never truly saw what was happening behind those walls. Inside, the picture was very different. He slept at strange hours, sometimes staying awake through the entire night and sleeping through most of the day. His diet had become unhealthy, heavy food in large amounts, eaten at odd times with little balance or care. His weight had climbed significantly, and performing had become physically difficult in ways it never was before. Those who worked for him noticed the changes clearly. The musicians who played beside him on stage, the bodyguards who traveled with him, the staff who moved through Graceland every day, all of them could see that something was wrong. He looked tired in a way that sleep could not fix. He looked heavy in a way that had nothing to do with his body, yet very few people spoke up. Some stayed quiet out of loyalty. Elvis had given many of them their livelihoods, their careers, their entire way of life. Speaking out felt like a betrayal. Others stayed quiet out of fear. Disagreeing with Elvis or pushing back against his choices had consequences. People had been let go for less. His father, Vernon, watched his son struggle and felt helpless. His daughter, Lisa Marie, was still a young child, too small to understand what she was seeing. His fiancée, Ginger, had only recently come into his life and was still learning who he truly was beneath the surface. The concerts continued, the tours continued. The image of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, continued to roll forward like a machine that no one knew how to stop. The man powering that machine, though, was running out of fuel. What very few people understood at the time was that the exhaustion they could see on his face was only part of the story. The real damage was hidden somewhere far deeper, and it had a name. A strange final night. The night of August 15th, 1977, should have been quiet. Elvis was scheduled to leave Memphis the following day for the start of a new tour. The bags were being prepared, the plans were in place, everything was ready. Elvis could not sleep. He moved through Graceland in the early hours of the morning, restless in a way that felt different from his usual sleepless nights. The house was still and dark. Most of the staff and friends who lived on the property had already gone to rest. The grounds outside were quiet. The city beyond the gates carried on without knowing that anything unusual was happening. Ginger Alden, his fiancée, was with him that night. She had been close to Elvis for several months by then, and she had come to know the rhythms of his unusual life. The late nights, the irregular hours, the way the house seemed to exist in its own separate world from everything outside. She was used to the strangeness of life inside Graceland. Still, that night felt different to her too. Elvis spent time reading in the early hours of the morning. The book he had chosen was one that dealt with spiritual questions, with life, with death, and with what might exist beyond the world people could see and touch. It was not a light or casual choice of reading for a man preparing to leave on a music tour. He had spoken in recent weeks to people close to him about things that sometimes felt like goodbyes. Not dramatic declarations, nothing that made alarm bells ring loudly in the moment, just small, quiet words that carried a weight people only recognized later when they look back. Around 2 in the morning, he told Ginger he was going to the bathroom. He told her he could not sleep and would read a little longer. He asked her not to fall asleep on him. She smiled and they spoke briefly, comfortable in the way two people are when they feel safe with each other. She fell asleep not long after. The house stayed quiet through the early morning hours. No sounds, no movement, nothing to suggest that anything was wrong beyond the usual restlessness of a man who struggled to find peace in the dark. Outside, Memphis was waking up slowly. The summer heat was already building. Fans across the country were excited about the upcoming tour dates, unaware that the man at the center of it all was spending his final hours alone in a bathroom, reading by himself in silence. The last night of Elvis Presley's life passed without ceremony, without warning, and without anyone truly understanding what was slipping away. The final hours were already counting down, the King's last words. At some point in the very early hours of August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley walked into his private bathroom at Graceland for the last time. He told Ginger he would not be long. Those were the last words he ever spoke. The bathroom Elvis used was large and private, attached to his personal bedroom suite on the upper floor of Graceland. It was a space only the people closest to him ever saw. It was where he would often go during his sleepless nights, taking books, spending time alone in the quiet when the rest of the house had gone still. Ginger drifted back to sleep. The room stayed quiet. The house stayed quiet. No one knows exactly what happened in those hours between when Elvis walked through that door and when he was found. The medical details that emerged later painted a picture of a body that had been under enormous strain for a very long time, a system pushed far beyond its limits, finally giving out. What is known is that he was not found quickly. Hours passed with no sound, no call, nothing to suggest anything was wrong. The staff downstairs moved through their morning routines. Others in the house slept on. The tour preparations continued in the background, phone calls being made, logistics being handled, no one thinking to check on the man the whole operation revolved around. It was close to 2 in the afternoon when Ginger woke up. She noticed immediately that Elvis had not returned to bed. She called out. There was no answer. She moved toward the bathroom door and pushed it open. And what she found on the floor changed everything in an instant. Elvis was lying face down. He was not breathing. His body was unresponsive. She called out for help. The screams that followed brought staff rushing up the stairs. Emergency services were called within moments. Paramedics arrived and worked on him, trying to bring him back, trying to find something to hold on to. There was nothing left to find. He was pronounced dead at Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis later that afternoon. The official time was given as 3:53 in the afternoon on August 16, 1977. The man who had once made the entire world stand still with a single note had gone quietly, alone on a bathroom floor, with no one beside him and no grand farewell. It was an ending so ordinary it felt almost impossible for someone so enormous. The world was told it was his heart, a simple, clean explanation for a very complicated death. The public accepted it at first. The doctors who ran the tests, though, were finding something far more troubling inside his body. That moment, everything changed. Ginger Alden had been asleep for hours when something pulled her awake. It was close to 2 in the afternoon on August 16, 1977. The bedroom was warm and still. The house around her was quiet in the way Graceland often was during the day, a heavy, closed-off silence that kept the outside world at a distance. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then she noticed Elvis had not come back to bed. She called his name. No answer came back. She called again, louder this time, and the silence that followed felt different from the ordinary quiet of the house. It had a weight to it. Something in the air had shifted in a way she could not explain, but could not ignore. She moved toward the bathroom door. What she found on the other side of that door was something no person is ever prepared for. Elvis was on the floor, face down, his body completely still. She rushed to him, touched him, tried to rouse him. He did not respond. His skin was wrong, his color was wrong, everything was wrong. She screamed for help. The sound brought people running from other parts of the house. Staff came up the stairs. Friends who had been on the property rushed into the room. The scene that greeted them was one of complete chaos and disbelief. People crowded around him, some trying to help, some frozen in shock, some already crying before they fully understood what they were looking at. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived at Graceland and worked on Elvis with everything they had. They tried to stabilize him. They loaded him into an ambulance and made the drive to Baptist Memorial Hospital with urgency and speed, refusing to give up. The doctors at the hospital continued working on him for some time after he arrived. Every available effort was made. The team understood who was on that table, understood what it would mean if they could not bring him back, and they pushed as hard as medicine allowed. It was not enough. At 3:53 in the afternoon, Elvis Aaron Presley was officially pronounced dead. He was 42 years old. He had not performed his final scheduled concert. He had not said a proper goodbye to anyone. He had simply gone into a room and not come out. The news left the hospital and moved through Memphis like a shockwave. From Memphis, it moved across the country, and from the country, it moved across the entire world. Radio presenters broke down reading the announcement. Television programs were interrupted. People stopped what they were doing in offices, in kitchens, in cars, in schools, and felt the ground shift beneath them. A man who had seemed too big for the world to contain had been taken by something as quiet and ordinary as a bathroom floor. The grief was immediate and enormous. The questions, though, were only just beginning. The truth inside his body. When the initial announcement came, the explanation was simple. Elvis Presley had died of a heart attack. It was a clean, understandable cause of death for a man who had visibly struggled with his health in his final years. The public received it, mourned, and began the process of saying goodbye to their king. The doctors who had performed the examination, however, were sitting with a much more complicated picture. The toxicology results that came back in the weeks following Elvis's death revealed something that the brief official statement had not captured. His body had contained at least 10 different prescription medication at the time of his death, several of them at levels that were dangerously high. These were not recreational substances taken in secret. They were medications, legally prescribed, obtained through legitimate channels, and taken in combinations and quantities that had placed his body under extraordinary strain for a very long time. The list included powerful sedatives, painkillers, and other medications used to treat a wide range of conditions. Taken individually and carefully, some of these medications served genuine medical purposes. Taken together, in the doses that had been found in his system, they created a combination that the human body was never built to handle. Experts who reviewed the findings described the level of prescription medication dependency as severe. His body had been adapting to these substances for years, requiring more over time to achieve the same effects, building a tolerance that demanded ever-increasing amounts just to maintain a basic level of function. Elvis had not been hiding this entirely. People around him knew he took medication. They knew he relied on pills to sleep, to wake up, to manage pain, to get through performances, to come down after the energy of a show. What many of them did not fully grasp was the scale of it. How many different medication were involved, how frequently they were being taken, and how deeply dependent his body had become. The heart attack listed as his official cause of death was real. His heart did fail. The question that the toxicology results raised, the question that medical experts and investigators began pressing hard on, was what had caused that heart to fail. A diseased heart under normal circumstances might have continued for years. A heart carrying the burden of that many powerful substances, working overtime to keep a heavily medicated body functioning day after day, was a heart under a very different kind of pressure. The official cause was never fully changed. The debate around what truly killed Elvis Presley, his heart condition or the staggering quantity of medication inside his body, continued for decades after his death and has never been entirely settled. What the toxicology results made impossible to ignore was the fact that Elvis had been suffering far more than the public ever knew. His body had been carrying a secret that the world was only now beginning to understand. The next question was unavoidable. Where had all those medication come from, and who had been providing them? The doctor in the shadows behind every prescription, there is a signature. Behind every bottle of pills that moved through Graceland in those final years, there was a name on a pad, a doctor authorizing the medication, a medical professional who held the legal power to give Elvis Presley access to the substances his body had come to depend on. That name was Dr. George Nicopolis. The people around Elvis simply called him Dr. Nick. Dr. Nick had been Elvis's personal physician since 1971. He was not a distant formal figure who saw his famous patient occasionally and signed papers from across a desk. He was close. He traveled with Elvis on tour. He was present at performances. He was woven into the daily fabric of Elvis's life in a way that went far beyond the usual relationship between a doctor and a patient. In the months leading up to Elvis's death, Dr. Nick had prescribed him an extraordinary number of medications. Investigations that followed the death revealed that, in the first 8 months of 1977 alone, more than 10,000 doses of various medication had been prescribed to Elvis and those traveling with him, with the vast majority intended for Elvis himself. The numbers, when laid out clearly, were difficult to process. Dr. Nick's explanation was consistent. He said he had been trying to help. He argued that Elvis was in genuine pain, that he suffered from real medical conditions that required real treatment, and that the prescriptions had been his attempt to manage a complicated and deteriorating health situation. He maintained that his intentions had always been to keep Elvis functioning, to keep him able to perform, to keep him as stable as possible given the circumstances. Not everyone accepted that explanation. Critics argued that no responsible medical professional could look at those prescription numbers and consider them appropriate care. They pointed to the quantities, the combinations, the frequency, and said that what Dr. Nick had provided was not treatment but enablement. That instead of guiding Elvis toward help, he had stood at the door and kept it open. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners investigated Dr. Nick following Elvis's death. He was charged with over 100 counts of inappropriately prescribing controlled substances. A criminal trial followed, and he was ultimately acquitted. His medical license was suspended later, however, and he lost it entirely for a period of time before eventually having it reinstated. Dr. Nick maintained until his final years that he had genuinely cared for Elvis and had done what he believed was right. He carried the weight of that association for the rest of his life, his name permanently bound to one of the most famous deaths in history. Whether he was a caring doctor overwhelmed by an impossible situation, or a man who failed his most famous patient in the most consequential way possible, remained a question that divided opinion for decades. The harder question, though, was not just about the doctor. It was about everyone else who had been standing close enough to see, and had chosen to look away. The people around him. Elvis Presley did not live alone. He was surrounded almost constantly by a group of men who had been with him for years, some for decades. They handled his schedule, his security, his travel, his money, and the countless details of a life that had grown too large for any one person to manage alone. They were known as the Memphis Mafia. The name had been given to them partly as a joke, a nod to the tight, loyal, insular nature of the group. These were not hired strangers. They were friends, some of them childhood companions, men who had grown up alongside Elvis or had been brought into his world early enough that the line between employee and family had long since blurred beyond recognition. They loved him. That part was not in question. What was in question was whether love, without courage, had been enough. The people inside that circle watched Elvis deteriorate across the final years of his life. They saw the weight gain, the slowed speech, the confusion that sometimes crept into his eyes during conversations. They watched him struggle through performances that would have been effortless a decade earlier. They saw the medications, knew about the prescriptions, understood on some level that the volume of pills moving through Graceland was not normal. Very few of them intervened in any meaningful way. Some were afraid. Elvis had a temper, and those who had challenged him or questioned his choices had sometimes found themselves removed from the circle entirely. Losing access to Elvis meant losing a job, a lifestyle, and in many cases, an identity. These men had built their entire lives around him. Stepping back was not a simple thing. Others told themselves it was not their place, that Elvis was an adult, that he had doctors, that the people paid to make medical decisions were handling it. It was easier to believe that someone else was taking care of it than to be the one who stood up and said something was deeply wrong. His father Vernon watched from a painful distance, aware that his son was struggling but unable to find a way through the wall that the lifestyle and the entourage had built around him. After Elvis died, some members of the Memphis Mafia spoke publicly about what they had witnessed. Books were written, interviews were given, and the accounts that emerged painted a picture of a man who had been surrounded by people who cared deeply but acted too little and too late. The grief among those men was real. So was the guilt. They had been close enough to reach him. The question that followed them for the rest of their lives was why, when it mattered most, so few of them did. The world mourning outside Graceland's gates knew none of this yet. What they did know was beginning to feel less and less like the whole story. The mystery grows. Elvis Presley was buried on August 18, 1977, just 2 days after his death. The speed of the arrangement surprised some people. Others understood it as a practical necessity, a response to the enormous public attention that had descended on Memphis the moment the news broke. The questions, though, did not get buried with him. In the weeks and months that followed, details about his death began to surface in ways that felt incomplete and inconsistent. The initial cause of death had been listed as cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat. Then the toxicology results emerged, revealing the staggering quantity of medication in his system. The official position shifted and softened, and was clarified, and then questioned again. And with each adjustment, the public's confidence in the full story slipped a little further. Investigations were opened. The medical examiner's findings became a matter of dispute. Experts disagreed publicly about what had truly caused his heart to stop. The Shelby County Medical Examiner maintained that the cardiac event was the primary cause, while other medical professionals reviewed the same evidence and reached very different conclusions. The gap between what was officially stated and what felt fully explained was wide enough for something powerful to grow inside it. Rumors began. They started small, the way rumors always do. A question here, a whispered theory there. People who struggled to accept that someone as large as Elvis could simply be gone began reaching for alternative explanations. The inconsistencies in the official account gave those questions just enough room to breathe and expand. Then came the sightings. People reported seeing Elvis at petrol stations, in supermarkets, on street corners, in cities far from Memphis. Some of these accounts were clearly the product of grief and wishful thinking. Others were detailed enough to attract serious attention, or at least serious media coverage. The idea that Elvis had faked his own death, had staged an exit from a life that had become unbearable, took root in popular culture with a speed that surprised almost everyone. His name on the grave at Graceland was said to be misspelled, his middle name written as Aaron rather than Aaron, which some took as a deliberate signal. Conspiracy theories multiplied, each one finding an audience, each one adding another layer of mystery to a death that already had more than enough unanswered questions. The family said nothing publicly that fed the rumors. They mourned, they protected his image, and they kept the gates of Graceland largely closed to the noise outside. The noise, however, did not go away. It simply grew louder with every passing year, carrying a question that millions of people around the world were not yet ready to let go of. The final chapter of Elvis Presley's story was supposed to have been written on August 16th. It was becoming clear that the story was far from over, a legend that never died. The grief that followed Elvis Presley's death was unlike anything the modern world had seen before. Within hours of the announcement, fans began gathering outside the gates of Graceland. They came on foot, by car, by bus, traveling from cities and towns across America, many of them driving through the night without stopping. They brought flowers, photographs, handwritten notes, and tears. They stood in the Memphis heat and wept for a man most of them had never met, but felt they had known their entire lives. An estimated 80,000 people lined the streets of Memphis for his funeral procession. The scenes were overwhelming, raw, with a kind of public grief that had no real comparison. He was buried at Forest Hill Cemetery initially, then later moved to the meditation garden at Graceland, where he rests today alongside his mother, his father, and his grandmother. The garden became sacred ground almost immediately, a place where fans from every corner of the world came to stand quietly and feel close to something that had meant everything to them. Graceland opened its doors to the public in 1982. It became one of the most visited private homes in the entire world, second only to the White House in America. Millions of people have walked through those rooms, stood in that jungle room, passed by that bathroom door, and felt the strange, heavy presence of a life that ended too soon. His music never stopped selling. His image never faded. New generations discovered him through films, through documentaries, through the stories passed down by parents and grandparents who remembered exactly where they were the day they heard the news. Lisa Marie carried his memory with deep devotion until her own death in 2023. Priscilla continued to honor his legacy and keep his story alive for the world. Elvis Presley was 42 years old when he died. He had lived enough for several lifetimes. The king may have left the building. The world never quite got over losing him.